In a time when headlines scream louder than history books, and division outshouts understanding, we face a critical moment. Most Americans don't really know what their political parties stand for, or how past and present policies have shaped the lives we live today. Without true understanding, we are not citizens. We are just customers buying slogans. Today we cut through the noise, not with anger, but with knowledge. Let's talk about the real history, real impact, and real future of America's political parties. Not with party loyalty, not with blind outrage, but with facts, consequences, and a vision for something better. The Republican Party, often known as the GOP, was founded in 1854, rising from a movement to stop the expansion of slavery. Early Republicans like Abraham Lincoln believed in using federal power to promote unity and opportunity. Over time, the party evolved. Today, Republicans champion small government, lower taxes, state rights, personal responsibility, and free market capitalism. They often position themselves as defenders of traditional values, national security, and individual freedoms. However, critics argue that Republican policies can favor corporations, the wealthy, and rural populations over urban and marginalized communities. The Democratic Party is the oldest political party in the United States, tracing back to the 1820s with Andrew Jackson. Historically, Democrats supported limited government, but by the 20th century they shifted toward a platform of active government intervention to promote social justice, civil rights, and economic opportunity. Modern Democrats advocate for stronger federal protections in areas like healthcare, education, labor rights, and the environment. They generally believe that government has a responsibility to ensure basic fairness in society. Critics argue that Democrats can create inefficient bureaucracy and foster dependency on government programs. The Libertarian Party, founded in 1971, believes in maximum individual liberty and minimal government interference. They support free market economics, strong protections for personal freedoms, and non-interventionist foreign policy. Libertarians oppose almost all forms of taxation, government regulation, and centralized control. Their philosophy can appeal to both conservatives and liberals who distrust government power. However, critics argue that pure libertarianism ignores the real-world need for some regulation to protect vulnerable people and the environment. The Green Party focuses on environmental sustainability, social justice, non-violence, and grassroots democracy. Greens argue that neither major party adequately addresses ecological collapse, wealth inequality, or the influence of corporations in politics. They support strong government action to fight climate change, provide universal health care, and build community-based economies. Critics claim that the Green Party's policies are often economically unrealistic or too radical for broad public support. Millions of Americans now identify as independent voters, rejecting affiliation with any major party. Independents often support issue-based politics rather than strict party lines. Other minor parties, like the Constitution Party or Forward Party, emerge around specific ideologies: constitutional literalism, political reform, technology-driven governance, and more. Minor parties rarely win national offices, but often influence debates and force major parties to address neglected issues. The Republican Party frames itself as the party of small businesses, farmers, and working-class Americans who want less government interference. In practice, modern Republican policies often favor wealthier individuals, large corporations, suburban and rural populations, and traditionalist voters. Tax cuts championed by Republicans have disproportionately benefited high-income earners and large businesses, arguing it fuels economic growth, but critics point out it worsens wealth inequality. On cultural issues, Republicans increasingly align with religious conservatives and rural voters, focused on traditional family structures, gun rights, and national sovereignty. The Democratic Party brands itself as the party of the working class, minorities, immigrants, and the marginalized. In practice, Democrats focus heavily on urban voters, younger generations, people of color, unions, public sector employees, and academics. Policies like minimum wage increases, labor protections, expanded healthcare access, and civil rights enforcement reflect this base. However, critics argue that establishment Democrats sometimes prioritize corporate donors, tech giants, and elite universities, leading to tension with the party's populist left wing. Libertarians appeal to those who deeply distrust government, typically entrepreneurs, tech innovators, free market purists, and privacy advocates. Their base often includes younger voters frustrated by endless regulations, costly wars, and bloated bureaucracies. However, critics note that libertarian policies can favor those already privileged enough to thrive without government safety nets, leaving vulnerable populations at risk. The Green Party speaks for environmental activists, grassroots organizers, climate scientists, and progressive voters disillusioned with mainstream parties. They champion low-income and marginalized communities hit hardest by environmental degradation. Critics argue that because they pull votes away from Democrats in close races, Greens sometimes unintentionally strengthen the right, a dynamic known as spoiler effect. Independent voters span the political spectrum, from moderates tired of partisanship, to radical centrists, to people whose views don't fit neatly into two-party narratives. Independents often advocate for political reform, campaign finance regulation, term limits, and pragmatic problem-solving over ideological purity. However, without party infrastructure, independents often struggle to win major offices and can be co-opted by dominant parties. The Republican Party has had its share of historic contributions and failures. On the contributions side, it ended slavery with Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. It supported major infrastructure projects like the Transcontinental Railroad and pushed early conservation efforts through Teddy Roosevelt's national parks. The party also advocated for tax cuts that fueled certain periods of economic growth, particularly during the Reagan-era boom. However, the party has also faced significant failures. The Southern strategy of the 1960s appealed to racial resentment after civil rights advances. Deregulation and trickle-down economics helped widen the wealth gap. The party has often opposed climate change policy and modern environmental protections. Reckless tax cuts, such as the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, added trillions to the national debt without long-term economic payoff. In recent years, there's been an increasing tolerance of anti-democratic rhetoric, especially in the Trump era. The Democratic Party, too, has had its historic contributions and failures. On the positive side, it fought for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which form the foundations of the modern safety net. The party led civil rights reforms, including the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act under Lyndon B. Johnson. It established labor rights with New Deal protections for unions and pioneered public education expansion, including Pell Grants for college students. However, the party has faced its own failures. The early Democratic Party pre-Civil War was staunchly pro-slavery and racist. During World War II, under FDR's administration, it was responsible for the internment of Japanese Americans. In more recent history, the party's complicity with Wall Street deregulation, such as Bill Clinton's repeal of Glass-Steagall, contributed to the 2008 crash. And at times, the modern Democratic establishment has catered more to corporate interests than to workers or small communities. The Libertarian Party has also made its mark with both contributions and failures. On the contributions side, the party has elevated public debate about personal liberty, privacy, and government overreach. It issued early warnings about mass surveillance and endless wars. However, the party's ideological purity often results in political isolation, leading to little influence on actual governance. Additionally, some of its economic policies would dismantle necessary public protections such as food safety and clean water regulations. The Green Party has made significant historic contributions and faced notable failures. They forced the conversation on climate change, ecological sustainability, and corporate political corruption. They also advocated early for universal healthcare and renewable energy, long before these ideas gained mainstream acceptance. However, they have had their share of failures. The spoiler effects in key elections like Ralph Nader in 2000 arguably shifted national outcomes unfavorably. Additionally, their lack of realistic economic plans sometimes weakens their broader appeal. Independents have also had their historic contributions and failures. They pressure both major parties to rethink rigid ideologies. Movements like Ross Perot's deficit reduction focus forced national conversations. Figures like Bernie Sanders pushed debates on income inequality, healthcare, and campaign finance reform. On the flip side, without structural support, independents often fracture movements rather than consolidate real power. Moreover, some independents promote fringe or conspiracy-driven platforms that cloud serious reform efforts. Republicans often argue that education should be controlled by states and local school boards, not the federal government. On the surface, local control sounds empowering, but in practice it leads to massive inequality. Wealthier districts thrive while poorer ones fall behind. Textbooks differ wildly, and history is distorted depending on political agendas. Without federal oversight, many states slash education budgets, lower standards, and censor vital topics like civil rights, science, and world history. Federal mandates such as desegregation, Title IX protections, and standardized benchmarks ensured basic equality. Without strong federal standards, we risk creating 50 different Americas, some educated, some left behind. In a global economy, our competitors like China, Japan, Germany, and South Korea invest heavily in nationalized, rigorous education systems. If America dismantles national educational goals, we are setting our own children up to lose the global race. Why Trump's AI learning push won't work without fundamental education reform. Donald Trump proposed introducing AI learning at early ages. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. You can't teach AI if students are failing basic math, science, and critical thinking. US students lag behind their global peers in math and reading skills, ranking 30th to 40th internationally in many assessments. Meanwhile, countries like Singapore, South Korea, and Finland start with fundamentals, intense focus on math, literacy, problem-solving, and discipline. Pushing AI education without first rebuilding foundational skills is like building a skyscraper on sand, doomed to collapse. Without strong basics, the US would simply create another digital divide. A few elite students mastering AI, while millions fall farther behind. Why tax breaks and tariffs hurt America's future. Tax cuts and tariffs are often sold as patriotic boosts to the economy, but in reality, they frequently explode the national debt, hurt consumers, and damage international trade relationships. 2017 Republican tax cuts added nearly $2 trillion to the U.S. debt, with minimal evidence of lasting middle-class benefit. Tariffs under Trump aim to punish China, but American farmers, manufacturers, and consumers bore much of the cost through higher prices. In a nation already carrying over $34 trillion in debt, further slashing revenue and disrupting trade only accelerates the coming crisis. Interest payments on debt are now one of the largest single expenses in the federal budget, meaning less money for education, healthcare, and infrastructure. America's real economic strength has always come from innovation, education, and global cooperation, not isolationism or endless corporate giveaways. Why federal education standards are crucial for America's future. Imagine if every state set its own medical standards, or aviation standards, or building codes. Chaos would follow, and lives would be lost. Education is no different. Federal standards ensure that whether a child grows up in New York City or rural Mississippi, they learn the critical skills needed to thrive in the modern world. They ensure that scientific facts aren't erased by political agendas. That history includes the good, the bad, and the lessons we must not forget, that math, engineering, and technological literacy stay competitive with rising global powers. The 21st century will be dominated by nations that invest in brainpower, not slogans. Without a unified national strategy for education, driven by excellence, not ideology, America risks becoming a second-tier country in a first-tier world. Political parties were meant to serve the people, not divide them. America has achieved greatness not through loyalty to a logo, but through loyalty to principles, truth, education, opportunity, justice, innovation. Today we face a simple choice. Do we continue down a path of division, shortcuts, and crumbling systems, or do we rebuild, thoughtfully, bravely together? We need an education system that lifts every child, regardless of zip code. We need leaders who invest in long-term prosperity, not short-term polling wins. We need citizens, not customers, who demand better than slogans and billion-dollar donors. The parties can argue over policies, but America's survival depends on remembering what unites us: a belief in better, a belief in fairness, a belief that the future should belong to the dreamers, the builders, and the peacemakers, not the power brokers. Learn the truth, speak with courage, vote with wisdom. The future isn't red or blue, it's the choices we make now, it's the country we leave for those who come after us.